If you've ever wondered how ancient people explain the beginning of everything, from the stars to the gods to why we exist, then today's video just might be for you. Today, I'll be reviewing the Great Courses series Creation Stories of the Ancient World by Dr. Joseph Lamb. Welcome to Spencer Reads Everything. I'm your host, Spencer Duncan, and as promised, I'm starting my review of some of the Great Courses series because I am a longtime fan and because I have dramatically increased my intake of them for research purposes for my other channel, History Unraveled with Dr. Duncan. Please go check that out if it sounds interesting to you at all. And it is only appropriate that the first review is a look at origin myths and creation stories. Creation Stories of the Ancient World is a 12-lecture series by Dr. Joseph Lamb, who is an associate professor of religious studies at UNC Chapel Hill, and he is an expert in the Hebrew Bible and Ugaritic studies. He also teaches ancient languages like Akkadian and Aramaic. In addition to this series, he has various papers and book chapters. He also has a book published in 2016 called The Patterns of Sin in the Hebrew Bible, Metaphor Culture, and the Making of a Religious Concept, and that was published by the Oxford University Press. In this course, he doesn't just retell creation myths, he analyzes how they work, what they meant in their time, and what their relevance is to this day, century and millennia after anyone even believed in most of these myths, although not all. We will, of course, be talking about some that are still held as beliefs by some today. So here is my lecture by lecture summary. I will say that as I cover these, I won't always do lecture by lecture, but this is only a quick 12 lecture series, and I do think that there is certainly enough in each lecture that I can at least give it a few sentences. I will also give you some of my key takeaways and my thoughts, of course, on who this series is and isn't for. The first lecture is Creation Stories and Why They Matter. In this, Dr. Lamb begins by framing creation myths as culturally significant stories that express a society's understanding of itself. Myths tell us where we come from and why the world is the way it is. It is useful for anchoring social structures and religious beliefs and moral codes. So, drawing from the Sumerian myth of Gilgamesh, Enkidu, and the underworld, Lamb explores how such stories often begin with phrases like "in those days" or "in those distant days," helping to locate the narrative in a mythic time when foundational aspects of the world were first established. Ancient Mesopotamian cosmology is introduced, highlighting a three-tiered universe of heaven, earth, and the underworld. The lecture ends by asserting that myths, even in secular or scientific contexts like the Big Bang, still frame our understanding of reality. He actually spends a fair amount of time on that Big Bang analogy, trying to help us understand that there is a tendency to be dismissive of myths for a few reasons. One, we believe we have disproven them, or as I've already pointed out, many of them were parts of a belief system that have long since gone extinct. But he uses the Big Bang for a few things. One, to help highlight the fact that even something like the Big Bang, it has a whole lot of scientific value behind it. It is still a metaphor. Even the phrase the Big Bang is a metaphor. And so those are the types of things that he is trying to get you to think deeper about and to better appreciate the founding myths of societies that no longer even exist. Lecture 2 is talking about metaphors. It is reading the metaphor in creation stories. This lecture actually delves into how metaphor and symbol operate in creation myths. Metaphors such as birth and fashioning are not merely literary flourishes, they are actually core tools for conceptualizing abstract realities. And so Dr. Lamb draws from linguistics and cognitive theory to argue that metaphor shapes not just narrative, but thought itself. And the examples include Tiamat's womb in Enuma, Elish, and the potter god Khnum in Egypt. These metaphors suggest different relationships between creator and creation. Additionally, birthing implies kinship and continuity, and fashioning implies difference and subservience. And so the metaphor also imposes a perspective on the reader, shaping their complicity in the worldview that is being offered by this myth. Again, trying to give it just a little more oomph and a little more justification for why you might find it personally relevant nowadays. Lecture 3, he focuses in on Mesopotamian creation of Enuma Elish. Enuma Elish is introduced as the most complete Mesopotamian account of creation, likely composed in the late 2nd millennium BCE and preserved in the library of King Ashurbanipal. It begins with Apsu and Tiamat, personifications of freshwater and saltwater, whose union births younger gods. Conflict emerges when Apsu plots to kill them and Tiamat protests, but is ultimately drawn into battle. Marduk, a younger god, is chosen to fight Tiamat in exchange for kingship. He slays her and forms the cosmos from her body, sky from her upper half, earth from her lower half, and the epic ends with the glorification of Marduk and the city of Babylon. Lamb reads this not only as a myth of creation, but as a political and theological legitimization of Babylon's dominance. In the fourth lecture, the Mesopotamian Flood, the Atrahasis epic. Similar to the Enuma elish, the Atrahasis epic wrestles with the human-divine relationship, but it focuses on humanity's origins and purposes. And initially, humans are created to relieve the gods of labor, but their rapid growth and noisiness disturb the gods. Enlil sends various plagues and famines, and finally a devastating flood to reduce humanity. And Ea, a trickster god, warns Atrahasis, also known in other versions as Utnapishtim and Zeusudra, and he builds a boat and survives. And afterwards, humans repopulate, but the gods impose limits, creating barren women and celibate priestesses to control the birth rate. The story reflects on divine-human interdependence and the tension between order and excess. In Lecture 5, we jump over to the Egyptian gods of creation. Unlike the Mesopotamians' unified narratives, Egyptian creation myths are diffuse and actually tied to specific regions like Heliopolis and Hermopolis and Memphis and Elephantine. In the cosmology of Heliopolis, a tomb emerges from the primordial waters and gives rise to other gods in genealogical sequence that includes Shu, which is the air, Tefnut, which is moisture, Geb, which is earth, and Nut, who is sky. And it all culminates in Osiris and Isis. In Hermopolis, the Ogdoad, or 8 primordial deities representing chaos and darkness and hiddenness and water, all suggest creation as the emergence from negation. In Memphis, the god Ptah creates through speech and thought, as described in the Memphite theology. Each god embodies different aspects of creation. Ptah is a craftsman, Amun the hidden one, and Khnum shapes life on a potter's wheel. These diverse traditions offer insight into Egyptian views of divinity, kingship, and cosmic order. In Lecture 6, Egyptian Approaches to Creation, Dr. Lamb explores the diverse and metaphor-rich landscape of Egyptian creation myths, focusing on 2 conceptual pillars: Egypt's cyclical view of time and its tendency to synthesize mythic traditions. Egyptian creation is not a singular event, but a process repeatedly, ritually, and cosmically. Myths from Heliopolis, as you recall, Atum and the Aeneid, Hermopolis, Ogdoad, and of course Memphis, Ptah, offer variant modules, spontaneous emergences from the primordial waters, creation through thought and speech, and anthropomorphic acts such as self-gratification or sneezing to bring forth Shu and Tefnut. And the Egyptian texts like the pyramid and coffin texts speak in timeless tenses, blurring the lines between past and present. Symbols such as the primordial mound and lotus flower and cosmic egg reflect an aesthetic of emergence and fertility distinct from the conflict-driven models of Mesopotamia. In Lecture 7, the storm god's supremacy in the Baal cycle, Lamb shifts to Ugarit, where the Baal cycle offers a myth not of cosmic creation per se, but of divine kingship through conflict. Baal is the storm god who defeats Yam, the god of the sea, and Mot, the god of death, and asserting dominion over the cosmic order and seasons. The story is rooted in Ugaritic political theology and agriculture, equating Baal's death with drought and his resurrection with rain. The myth resembles Enuma elish, and it may predate it, suggesting a widespread Near Eastern motif of the storm god defeating the sea to establish order. The Baal cycle's structure with palace building and divine feasts and final confrontations mirrors the socio-political life of Ugarit. Baal's temporary submission to Mot and eventual return also highlight the cyclical nature of power, death, and renewal. Baal is another one that you may recognize from the Old Testament. Elijah is frequently in conflict with the priests of Baal. Lecture 8, Hittite creation in the Kumarbi cycle. The Kumarbi cycle features stories of divine succession akin to Greek mythology, which is of note for a few reasons. The Hittites, also again referenced in the Old Testament, are important because they are going to be our first Indo-European speakers in what is now the Near East, and they also are going to be some of the first Iron Age civilizations. And so they are an incredibly important civilization as we look at this bridging between the Near East and of European history. And so that is one of the reasons that makes this an especially interesting bit of theology. In the Kumarbi cycle, it begins with Alalu ruling the heavens before being overthrown by Anu, who is in turn dethroned by Kumarbi. And in a dramatic moment, Kumarbi bites off Anu's genitals becoming impregnated with multiple gods, including the storm god Teshub. And a fragmented but telling mythological episode follows. Teshub emerges from Kumarbi and eventually contends for kingship. Themes include generational struggle and violence and divine paternity. The story also features a primordial being named Upilori, who unknowingly supports the cosmos. He's a figure reminiscent of Atlas. Scholars note striking parallels between this cycle and Hesiod's Theogony, particularly the succession myth and the rise of the storm god. These stories reinforce the notion of shared motifs and mythic diffusion across the ancient Near East. Finally, we come to the Greek creations. A lot of people are familiar with a lot of different Greek myths, but I actually would posit that most people are not familiar with the actual Greek myths of creation, especially as detailed in Hesiod's Theogony. I think that that is one of the works that Greek historians are very familiar with, but your average person actually is not going to be quite as familiar with. In Hesiod's Theogony, we see a distinctly Greek genealogy of the gods, beginning with Chaos, Gaia, who is earth, and Eros, who is desire. However, unlike Babylonian or Hittite models, Hesiod's poem unfolds as a poetic invocation of the muses, and it actually emphasizes divine succession. Ouranos is castrated by Kronos, who is overthrown by Zeus. These acts symbolize cosmic stabilization through generational conflict. Prometheus's trick at Mykone, offering Zeus bones wrapped in fat, and the punishment of humankind with Pandora establish permanent human divine boundaries. Hesiod's narrative reflects a Greek worldview in which gods embody cosmic functions and human limitations are built into the cosmos. Despite its Greek context, many motifs, including the castration, the succession, storm god's supremacy, have clear Near Eastern parallels. Finally, in Lecture 10, we get to the 7 days of creation in Genesis, something most people are going to be much more familiar with, especially here in the West, in the United States in particular. Dr. Lamb analyzes Genesis 1 not simply as a theological narrative, but as a temple text. The 7-day structure corresponds to the architectural and ritual design of Near Eastern temples, culminating in God resting on the 7th day, the equivalent of taking up a divine residence in a recently constructed place. This text emphasizes order. On days 1 through 3, we see the separation of elements of light and dark and water and sky and land and sea. Well, days 4 through 6, we see the populating of the world. We see the sun and the moon, the birds and the fish, the animals, and then finally, of course, the humans. And the story uses shared ancient Near Eastern motifs, such as the watery chaos, Hebrew Tehom equals the Akkadian Tiamat, but it reconfigures them monotheistically. Unlike in Enuma elish, the creation is not violent. God actually creates by speaking. In the beginning was the Word. Actually comes from the New Testament. You can see how speaking is what is evoking this creation. And humanity is actually made in God's image and serves not as laborers for the gods, but as stewards in God's temple world. This unique positioning gives Genesis the first theological and literary distinctiveness. So although we can certainly see some overlap with some pre-existing myths, there is also going to be some very clear and distinctive elements that are going to play a big role in its continued relevance, especially through religions that have quite a few adherents to this day. Lecture 11 continues with the Genesis narrative, and it looks at the Garden of Eden in Genesis, and it looks at chapters 2 and 3 of Genesis, which offers a more human-centered creation account. God forms Adam from dust and breathes life into him, placing him in Eden to cultivate it. Eve is created from Adam's rib, which is a metaphor of relational closeness, and this story explores moral boundaries and human limitations. Of course, you have the fall, and it is often read as the original sin, but Dr. Lamb actually encourages a more nuanced view. It is a narrative about the tension between knowledge and mortality, which is, of course, a very powerful through line through all of the myths that we've been talking about, this question of mortality. So eating from the tree of knowledge introduces self-awareness and mortality, and the expulsion from Eden formalizes the boundary between human and divine, similar to what we saw with Hesiod's Theogony. Compared to the first chapter in Genesis, this story features anthropomorphism and earthy metaphors and emotional resonance, marking a shift from cosmic to existential concerns. So there is a dramatic difference between the first two parts of the creation myth as found in Genesis. Finally, in Lecture 12, Creation Stories and the Present, Dr. Lamb ties together the course's main themes: the universality of watery chaos, divine conflict, and cosmic ordering, the metaphorical richness of birth, speech, and building, and the culturally contingent answers each story gives to fundamental questions. Creation stories aren't only about the past, they serve to explain present conditions and reaffirm cultural identity. So from Marduk's palace to Genesis's temple world, these narratives frame human life, authority, and meaning. And Dr. Lamb urges us to see myths not as outdated superstition, but as profound attempts to articulate existence. Creation stories persist because they help humans locate themselves in the universe and construct systems of belief and behavior, and above all, belonging. Across all 12 lectures, Dr. Lamb surfaces deep thematic threads that tie the ancient world together. A foundational theme is order out of chaos. From Mesopotamia's violent struggle between Marduk and Tiamat to the methodical structuring of the cosmos in Genesis, creation is almost never spontaneous. It is a process of imposing stability onto primordial disorder. In Egyptian, Ugaritic, and Greek stories, the world begins as a murky void, watery abyss, or generational conflict, only finding balance through divine action or succession. Another takeaway is the diversity of metaphors that cultures use to make sense of beginnings. Gods create through sexual union, word, breath, spit, sneezing, potter's wheels, battle, and just plain old craft work. These metaphors shape how each culture envisions the divine-human relationship. Are we children of the gods, or their servants, their creations, or all of the above? Dr. Lamb also highlights political and cultural functions of these myths. In Enuma Elish, Babylon is positioned as the cosmic center. In the Baal cycle, divine palace building mirrors political order. In Genesis, God rests not to recover, but to dwell in his cosmic temple. These stories legitimize power, and they enforce boundaries and encode religious practices. Finally, the course shows that creation stories are never just about the past. They are tools for making sense of the present. Who rules? Who serves? Why do we die? Why are we here? Whether in temples, courts, or homes, these stories helped people understand their world, and they still do. So who is this course for? Well, it is perfect for anyone fascinated by mythology or religion or ancient civilizations or literary analysis. If you've ever enjoyed books like Myth and Meaning by Levi Strauss or The Power of Myth by Joseph Campbell, or if you want to understand how the Bible's creation stories compare to their cultural neighbors, you'll love this. It's also great for educators, theology students, or I think any history buff looking to deepen their understanding of ancient cosmologies and what they meant to the people who told them. Who is this series not for? Well, if you're looking for a comprehensive timeline or a historical synthesis, this course stays largely in the realm of literary and theological analysis. It doesn't offer like a side-by-side historical map or a lot of detail on how close these civilizations were in time or space. Though they are certainly relatively close to each other, if you want every creation myth across the globe, this is limited to the ancient Near East and Mediterranean. So myths from India, China, Sub-Saharan Africa, or the Americas are going to be outside the scope of this series. All in all, I'd say, like any great courses lecture, the professor, Dr. Lamb, is deeply knowledgeable. And the episodes that are only 12 are incredibly thoughtful and very fascinating. This course offers a rich comparative look at creation stories and helps viewers appreciate the metaphorical sophistication of ancient texts. However, as a historian, I could use a bit more attention to historical context, how these cultures overlapped geographically and temporally, and why these particular myths were selected would have enhanced the overall experience. But still, it is a great resource for anyone looking to better understand the ideas and values that the first civilizations held. I would love to know what you guys think about this series in particular, or if you have other suggestions of series that are related to this, please let me know in the comments. I would love to hear what you guys have to say about this great courses series. Once again, my whole reason for taking on so many of these great courses is because I'm using them for research for my other channel, History Unraveled with Dr. Duncan. Again, please check that out if that sounds remotely interesting to you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on those notifications, and until next time, keep those pages turning.